All right, man, peace. So for those of you brothers who've been on my channel long enough, you know that I've been following the Colin Kaepernick national anthem protest, quote unquote national anthem protest, almost from its inception. And the main reason why I've been doing that is because, as I've been telling you brothers for the longest time, the only reason why the mainstream liberal sports media has been trying to put so much gasoline into this protest is because it is a Marxist protest. It is a protest that is meant to cause chaos, promote confusion. And as usual, they like to utilize the so-called black man as the vanguard of many of their Hegelian tactics to try to socially engineer American society. Once again, they want to make the NFL a quote-unquote woke league, a lot like the NBA. The NBA is already under the thumb of the Marxists. Almost all those guys in the NBA are Saturnians. When I say all those guys, I'm talking about the elite level players. They're Luciferians and Saturnians. There are many NFL players that are Luciferians and Saturnians as well. But they want to use the NFL to promote more higher level Luciferian agendas like homosexuality and lesbianism. I'll be covering that in later videos. Homosexuality, lesbianism, and transgenderism. They want the NFL to embrace those ideologies more and project them out to the world more like the NBA does. I get a lot of dudes who come on my channel and they snicker when I say that the only reason why the WNBA is still around is to promote lesbianism. And that is the reason why it is still around. People can laugh if they want to. The only reason why the WNBA is around is to promote lesbianism. Once again, the NBA is a woke league. It is woke. Meaning what? They allow themselves to be used as intermediaries, as proxies, to make certain quote-unquote new age or Luciferian philosophies more palatable to the masses, or more palatable to the masses, pardon me. The NFL is still much more resistant to putting forth a lot of those ideologies to the masses. That's why they align themselves with a more conservative fan base, and they align themselves to the military. Well, the Marxists from overseas can't have that. People like George Soros, etc., the same people who bankroll Black Lives Matter, which I believe has a hand in the back of more of the prominent members of the NFL protesters, that being Kaepernick and also Michael Bennett. I'm sure that they're having a battery put into their back by the so-called Black Lives Matter, actually Black Lesbians Matter movement. But once again, the reason why I call the mainstream sports media the mainstream liberal sports media is because they spend so much energy concentrating on the 1 to 2% of so-called black men that are protesting than the 97 to 98% that are not. Because I believe that even many of the so-called black men in the NFL realize that this protest is going nowhere, was never meant to go anywhere. Because the so-called leader of the protest, Colin Kaepernick, is a pawn, and he's not a leader. Never was. The person puppeting him is his girlfriend, Ness Nitty, who's not even a so-called black woman. She's a pawn of MS Corporations, the radio network that controls Hot 97 and Power 105. She's nothing but a pawn. That's why she was asked to speak at the UN a couple of years ago. They have big plans for her. And as I've stated previously, I believe that Colin Kaepernick is a monarch athlete. But that's neither here nor there. Let's see what they have to say about the so-called NFL protest. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Raiders running back Marshawn Lynch was the only player to protest the national anthem on Friday night, a night after Kenny Stills chose to kneel for the anthem and Malcolm Jenkins stood with a fist in the air.
Yes, Malcolm Jenkins, the double agent. The guy who claimed that he was no longer going to protest once the NFL owners gave him the money that they gave him. But now he's so caught down the woke rabbit hole and his other allegiances that he's decided to act as an agent of chaos once again. Once again, so-called black men, a lot of these empty gestures are not going to get our people anywhere. Anywhere. And I know that a lot of the pro-blackity blacks are going to get upset by that. I really don't give a shit. You guys have no end game, and when you have no end game, you should not be put in a prominent position.
As he did all of last year, Lynch chose to sit during the anthem, as he's done it many times throughout his career. Stephen, it seems like Marshawn Lynch has kind of flied under the radar in terms of him sitting during this whole ceremony.
The reason why he's flied under the radar, as you so astutely put it, Miss Molly Karam, is because Marshawn Lynch did not have the backing. He does not have the affiliations that Michael Bennett and Colin Kaepernick have had. That's why I state that there's no doubt in my mind that there are a couple of plants that are working with some Marxist power groups aka the Black Lesbians Matter movement, and maybe some other groups. And as I've stated from the very start, and once again for you brothers who go back that far on my channel, the first time I did a 3-part series on Michael Bennett, I stated this was before he even started to blow up in prominence in regards to acting as an agent of chaos in the NFL. I told you guys to watch out for him, because it was very clear to me that something was not quite right upstairs with him, and that he seemed very, very fractured. This was before the incident in Las Vegas, where I was telling brothers to watch out for him. And you see that they continuously put him in a prominent position in regards to someone that they want to work through and gain attention through the media, speaking about quote-unquote race. Marshawn Lynch gets no attention because it's very obvious to me that he does not have the connections that Michael Bennett and Colin Kaepernick have. And he most likely is not a Monarch athlete, while these other two guys are.
What do you think players should be doing now?
First of all, let me say this. It's incredibly important that I say this.
Well, before you say what you're going to say, bro, let me say what I'm going to say. What players should be doing right now is what they always should have been doing, which is making sure that they secure their bag and that they plan appropriately for the next NFL collective bargaining agreement. They have to stack and stock their coffers for dark days ahead. Because in order for them to make sure that they put themselves in an advantageous position to negotiate with the owners, they're going to have their victuals in order. They're going to have their provisions in order. They're going to have to be able to engage in siege warfare. The only way that you can engage in siege warfare is to make sure that your money is stacked, your food is stacked, and that your family's okay, and that you plan 5, 6, 7 years ahead. All these empty gestures are not going to get you what you need. If they truly want to make a difference in their community, that starts in your home, making sure that you're presiding over your home. I tell cats this all the time. I don't care if you're 22 years old living by yourself in a studio apartment, or if you're 37 years old with 3 wives and 10 children living in a nice house somewhere in the suburbs. I could care less. The best thing that you can do as a so-called black man is to make sure that you're presiding over your home and over yourself. That's how we have to start. Because too many brothers have these delusions of grandeur where they're supposed to be some revolutionary leader and they can't lead a fly to shit. And a lot of people may not like that. I'm just telling you the truth. A lot of so-called black men have these delusions of grandeur. And to be a great leader, you have to be able to strategize. This so-called protest shows no inkling of strategy whatsoever. So you know right off the bat that Colin Kaepernick is not a leader. And it showed because prior to this protest, he was known as not being a good leader. He was not a good communicator as a quarterback with the San Francisco 49ers. So why would you expect him to be a good communicator as a leader of a revolution? Makes no sense. But just getting back to the so-called black man, once we learn how to preside over ourselves and over our families, then we come together, brothers come together, and the best leaders are the ones that are put in the top level positions to make decisions over the community. That's how we learn how to administer. It's all about responsibility, but these are baby steps. Cats talking about revolution, all this other stuff. Stop, please. You have no idea really the profundity of what you're trying to say, the points that you're trying to broach. We have to sit back and think things out appropriately, because we try to compare ourselves to these different races, and we don't analyze why these other races are in the advantageous position that they're in. And I'll mention this probably in a future video, because I've mentioned this a long time ago in previous videos. So-called black people love to talk about voting. We have to get out there and vote. The race of people in America with the lowest voting turnout are the Asians. They're also the people with the highest wealth per capita in America. That shows you it's not about voting. Our people think way too emotionally. Why is that? Because the so-called black man thinks like his damn mother. So-called black men act and think like their mothers. Many brothers do, of course not all. You also have a lot of intelligent, brilliant brothers out there. But there's just too many so-called black men that think and act like their damn mother.
I never believed that Colin Kaepernick nor Eric Reid should be punished. I think it's wrong, particularly what has happened to somebody like Eric Reid.
They punish themselves with their bad decision making.
Colin Kaepernick appears to have been cognizant about what he was doing. He's taken this position. He sensed what the consequences would be, and apparently has no problem with it. My issue with Colin Kaepernick these days is the only time you hear from him is during tweets.
Well, why would you expect to hear from someone who's not truly aware of what he believes? He's a confused dude. And look, a lot of people are not going to like this, but I'm sorry. Somebody who's of a mixed race, they can't lead me anywhere when it comes to racial issues, because just by nature, you're confused. A lot of people are not going to like that. It's okay. If you're somebody who has a white parent and a black parent and all this other stuff, you already are dealing with dual allegiances. You have nothing to teach me. Sorry. You have to stand down, because you can't be trusted in crucial moments. That's number one. Number two, I think that Colin Kaepernick only speaks in tweets because he may not even be the one tweeting. Whoever his handler is may be putting out those tweets for him. Who knows? He just seems very spaced out and bugged out to me.
And I would like to see him be more visible. Having said all of that, I want to remind everybody know that I'm a proponent of them having the right to do what they have done. But with that said, it does get to a point in time where you got to ask yourself, what's the end game here?
Ding. Well, damn, Stephen A. Smith, I've been saying that for 2 years. You just starting to broach that topic, bro?
What's the goal, and what indeed are you accomplishing? And because that answer appears to be a bit convoluted, I'm of the mindset protests should stop. I'm of the mindset that the protest never should have started in the first place. And let me say this for a lot of you brothers out there that are fortunate enough to be blessed with the ability to think critically and be three-dimensional thinkers. You can't be scared of being rejected by people for saying things that you see and understand. Okay? One thing that I've learned in my life is to always trust my brain. When you trust your brain and you know that you're gifted, you're going to alienate certain people, because you're going to say things that you see, and you're going to see things that other people can't see before the time. They're going to look at you like you're crazy. I personally don't give a shit. When people come on my channel and say, oh man, you sound crazy, I say thank you. Thank you. Because I don't want to be like you. Because if I was like you, I would be swimming around in the muck with all the other tadpoles. I have no time for that. So one thing I've learned in my life is to trust my brain. I knew that this protest was going nowhere because they never had an end game. Because Colin Kaepernick was another mentally fractured, psychologically dependent simp dude, and that's not even approaching the MK Ultra dynamic. He's just not a leader. You can look at him and see that he's not a leader. I don't care how many photo ops he has where they try to dress him up like Huey Newton, or put him in dashikis, or have him pose like Muhammad Ali. None of that shit tricks me, because I know that behind that camera is a liberal Caucasian. So sorry, you can't fool me with that bullshit. Of the 32 teams in the National Football League, Ryan Clark, I'm not talking about the teams that play on Thursday night, because I understand they got a game to prepare for. But those other 30 teams, guess what? March on Washington. Don't stand. Don't kneel during the national anthem. Don't raise your fist during the national anthem. Don't alienate the potential patrons of your product that you're making money off of right now.
Ding, ding, ding.
Don't do that, because your problem was never with the NFL. It was about racial oppression.
Well, that's where you're wrong, bro. Their problem was always with the NFL. Because as I've stated, many of these prominent football players are truly upset that they cannot get guaranteed contracts. And when I said that many videos ago, a lot of the pro-blackity blacks got upset. What does that have to do with anything? What are you talking about? Dude, if these guys were getting paid guaranteed contracts, they would not be running their mouth like they are. Believe me. Because at the end of the day, it's all about securing the bag. When you secure the bag, then you take that money back and you can invest in your own community and however you see fit. The number one way that you invest in your community is to make sure that your children are productive individuals. That's what it's about, number one. Before you act like you're going to save the entire quote-unquote black race, you got to save your children, man. That's what it's really about. So if the NFL owners were to come out tomorrow and say we're going to guarantee the contracts of every player in the NFL who has a 3-year tenure or more, believe me, a lot of these protests will go away. If the owners said we're going to do this, but you guys are going to have to stop protesting, every other member of that NFL locker room would tell the protesters, if you get on one knee again, you're never going to get back up, because I'm going to break your fucking back. I guarantee you that. And the fact of the matter is that people like Kaepernick and Michael Bennett, once again, in my view, are plants. They've been compromised by some type of Marxist organization, most likely Black Lesbians Matter movement. And they started many of these protests to bring discord into the NFL, to try to use the NFL as a staging point to socially engineer society. And it's not working. But they're going to try some other things. But in regards to many of these other NFL players jumping on the bandwagon, it's just because they're not getting guaranteed contracts. That's all it's about. But these guys, they just don't think too clearly. That's why I call them NFL woke meatheads. Because by the time the collective bargaining negotiations come, they're not going to be mentally prepared for it. And the owners are going to take a big ass chunk out of their asses.
It was about police brutality. It was about injustices exercised against minority communities throughout this country. So your problem is not the NFL. Let's get away from making it the NFL's problem. Let's take it to where it really, really is. If we've got an issue, march on Washington, an off day, on a Tuesday. Every player.
Well, they can't do that because they can only protest when it's convenient for them. That's why they protest right before the game. I stated years ago when I first started talking about this issue, if they truly were concerned about police brutality, how come they're not taking a knee in front of their local police precinct? You're Michael Bennett, you're Colin Kaepernick, you'll get attention there. Why are you doing it during the national anthem for? If you're against the national anthem and you're against the fabric of America, why don't you set an example? Leave the NFL and go to one of these majority so-called black countries, or go to one of these countries in the quote-unquote motherland that you guys claim to love so much. Why are you not doing that? You know the real reason why most of the pro-blackity blacks and the Afrocentrists and a lot of these people who talk all this shit over the internet revolutionaries, the reason why they won't move to a country in Africa, the vast majority of them, is because they know that if they move there, they're not going to have anybody to blame there for their failures. As long as they're here in America, they could blame everybody else for their shortcomings and their failures. And don't get it twisted, is racism a huge issue in America? Absolutely. But the main reason why the so-called black men get so psychologically enamored by the racial dynamics in America is because he wants that hug. If he was not in such hot pursuit of validation from the Caucasian as he is, he would not be so concerned with what white people are doing. He wouldn't be so concerned with public displays of protest. Brothers would just get together behind closed doors and they would say, this is how we're going to strategize. We're going to boycott every so-called non-black business in the so-called black community. This is what we're going to do. We're going to boycott a lot of these Luciferian movements and agendas that are affecting our community. We're no longer going to allow for the propagation of many of these ideologies that are crippling the so-called black community, especially this matriarchal nonsense where you put the black woman on a pedestal over you, and all she's done is wreak havoc in every household with her madness and her nonsense, regurgitating what she's taught by her overlord, the liberal Caucasian woman, because once again, the main personality altar of the liberal black woman is feminism. It's not nationalism. The so-called pro-black woman can talk all that shit all day. At the end of the day, her feminist altar trumps that by miles. By miles. So we have a lot of issues that we need to handle that we're trying to cover up with these vainglorious, silly protests that are going to lead nowhere.
From all the other, not the teams that's going to play on Thursday night, but the other 30 teams that have Tuesday as an off day, march on Washington. I promise you, hundreds of thousands of people will show up in support with them. And you take it right to where the problem lies in terms of who has the power to make differences, and to whether it's with laws, whether it's with legislation, or what have you. Go ahead and march on Washington in unison as a collective body of NFL players. You don't have to bring it to Sunday NFL stadiums. You can march right on Washington and address it that way. That would be my proposal.
Well, that would be your proposal, Stephen A. Smith, but they'll never do that. You know why? Because then they would be exposed as the charlatans that they are. They're fearful that they're going to get in front of a microphone and not know what to say. Their trepidation is that they're going to be encountered by a congressman and not be able to articulate exactly what their grievances are. And Donald Trump has stated this point blank, that they're protesting and they don't even know what they're protesting. They're really just along for the ride on this woke train that got started on social media. They're not quite sure what they want. Because most of these guys don't even have real grievances. They're talking about police brutality. And I'm going to be very honest with you. When we talk about police brutality, the first thing that many of the pro-blacks are going to be confronted with when they finally do have this quote-unquote magical, mystical conversation that's supposed to solve all their problems, you know, that magical, mystical conversation that they want to have with their daddy, the white man. The first thing that the so-called white man is going to do is present you with stats that are going to show, in his view, police brutality is not any more grievous towards so-called blacks as it is towards so-called whites and people of other races. That's what they're going to show you in their stats. Now, how accurate their stats are, who knows? Fact of the matter is that the main reason why our people always complain about the police is that our people do not want to police themselves. And when I say our people, I'm not talking about all black people. I'm talking about the lower rungs of our society, and we know that. Okay? We know that. The so-called black woman, the liberal black woman, let me specify, and 95 to 98% of black women are liberal. They do not want a so-called black man to tell them what to do or to preside over the household or to act as administrators. So the real reason why they want the Caucasian police force to change how they treat their sons and their children is because they don't trust the black man in any way, shape, or form. They don't want him to act as an authority figure over the children. The job of the so-called black man in the so-called black community is to act as a sponsor and as a sperm donor. And that's it. That's why one of the main credos of the liberal black woman is that she's a strong black woman and that she does not need anyone. Well, what you're saying with that is that you're not a wife. And once again, many of these NFL players have been raised in homes where they've been taught to adore the image of the black feminine principle, and they act like black women. All they want to do is complain all day and get emotional. And I think with any type of logic, reason, or rationale, that's why they have no end game. So these are all processes that we have to streamline and get together before you start talking about the Caucasian man, because once again, these are issues that can be alleviated by ourselves if the so-called black man retains the position that he's supposed to be in, that being the head. That's why I tell these so-called black women that come on my channel, I'm not interested in what you're talking about. Unless you give me some pussy and some food, I don't really care about what you have to say. And that might offend certain people. I really don't give a damn. I get a lot of these chicks. I'll probably be dealing with that in another video. A lot of these so-called Israelite women or so-called church-going women acting like they're going to break down scriptures and write me essays on my channel. I don't want to hear what you have to say about spiritual matters. Don't write me any essays. If you want to write somebody an essay, you type up a nice long text message for your husband. You tell him how much you love him. That's what you can do. Because I'm not interested in your bullshit. Unless you give me some ass, I don't care what you're talking about.
I totally disagree.
Okay.
Usually when we talk social issues, we don't really debate because they're more...
We usually agree.
We have discussions about it.
We usually agree.
Right. And the debating and the butting heads is saved for the sports on the field stuff usually. But in this case, I genuinely disagree with you. In the first place, Marshawn Lynch been doing this all along. What's this got to do with...
I'm not talking about him, no.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not talking about him.
Right. It's got in other words,
Right.
He doesn't feel like he wants to stand for the national anthem. And this is America, damn it. You don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when people make the comment that, well, if you were in North Korea, you know what would happen? Mm-hmm. You're right. That's why we like living in America and not North Korea, right? I mean, that's part of what makes us American. Mm-hmm. Where, you know, the idea, the central tenet is really consent may be sought. You may want people to agree, but dissent.
I respect Marshawn Lynch far more than I do Colin Kaepernick or Michael Bennett, because once again, it's very clear to me that he's far more sincere in what he's doing than either one of those two guys are doing. Now, does he have a plan? Absolutely not. But at least he's not sponsored. He's not somebody with a battery in his back. He's just doing what he wants to do, and he's not looking for attention.
Disagreeing is not prohibited. Now, I want to get to the NFL, because I understand, like, the idea that the national anthem is a requirement at sporting events. People have brought this up. Should it be a requirement when you go see a movie? Why is it? Well, I mean, what allows us to watch a movie in freedom, right? As opposed to a sports in freedom. Why is that more?
Because a sporting event is ritualistic. It goes back to the commemoration of Nimrod, going all the way back to the Greek and Roman games. And before that, the Babylonian Kemetic mystery school system, where you had many sporting rituals that were meant to commemorate Asar or Marduk or whatever you want to call him. or even a lot of the games involving the ancient Minoans in Crete, I believe it was, where they would leap over the bull. Most of these sports are ritualistic in origin. You leap over the bull because the bull represents who? It represents Baal or Nimrod or Asar, whatever you want to call him.
More patriotic or nationalistic.
Also, please keep in mind that, once again, the so-called national anthem is pretty much just the corporate anthem of America. And one of the symbols of America, or one of the emblematic figures of America, is quote-unquote Uncle Sam, or Uncle Samael, the goat god. So that is his theme music. That's why they want you to stand for him before the sporting event, because the sporting event, once again, is meant to commemorate the goat god, aka Pan or Khnum or Benebdejet, whatever you want to call that goat entity.
In a movie, right? In India, by the way, you do have to stand. There is a national anthem during the. How far should this go? Well, I'm going to set that aside for a second, because the football and therefore the NFL has its roots at like West Point. You know, it's a militaristic game. It's a metaphor for war.
Where do you disagree with me?
The whole George Carlin routine. It's a metaphor for war. So I understand where nationalism or maybe patriotism plays a bigger role in respecting the military and how that allows us our freedom plays a bigger role. But here's the problem, Stephen A. If you want a neat resolution to this issue, for example, the issue of political protest.
There's never going to be a neat resolution to this issue, because most of the woke meathead NFL players are too dug in and they're too concerned about the support that they think that they're receiving over Twitter. So many of these players have fallen down the Twitter rabbit hole, or the Instagram rabbit hole, or the Facebook rabbit hole, where they're concerned about cyber people who don't exist, who don't matter. So they're dug in. There's going to have to be a huge, most likely contrived situation by both the NFL owners and players to make it look like there's this big cataclysmic confrontation between the two sides, and when the dust settled, that the NFL players were forced to no longer kneel. But they're going to have to come up with something to help bail out a lot of these NFL players who seem to be stuck on one knee, because if they get back up, they're going to be castigated by the liberal mainstream sports media. Already that player out there with the Tennessee Titans, I believe his name is Casey, who claimed that he was going to be protesting all year, decided that not only is he not going to protest, but he's actually going to salute during the national anthem. He's already been put in the crosshairs of the mainstream liberal sports media because he, quote unquote, went back on his word. Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless just lambasted him a few days ago. But I stated from the start that that guy was an idiot.
Then I would say, don't have a ceremony where a requirement is apparently to parrot your employer's political speech, to put on a display of patriotism. I would actually say nationalism, not patriotism, because it's, I am from here and therefore this is great and I don't want to hear about any problems. Then simply don't have a ceremony where people are asked to, except that you want to force them to if in case they dissent, put on that display. And that happens once you insert a ceremony like the national.
Well, Max Kellerman, number one, you're going on too long. Number two, in regards to the national anthem and any sense of nationalism or patriotism that is being used in correlation with the NFL, that toothpaste is out of the tube. The NFL cannot go back now and say we're no longer going to have the national anthem before games, because it's going to look like you let the 2% of NFL players that are quote unquote protesting against police brutality, like you let them win. And that's going to piss off their fan base even more than what the players are doing now. So what you're bringing up, that's not a viable option.
National anthem ceremony before a sporting event. And finally, and I bring this up every time, they are real. I understand First Amendment rights don't always extend to the workplace, right? Like, you don't have to say, so you could say whatever you want, but you might not get a job. You just won't be arrested, right? But I do believe certain protections probably do extend to the workplace. Like, for example, if someone says you must parrot your employer's political speech, and you, as a precondition of employment, I'm pretty sure if that got kicked up the courts, they would say, not so fast.
All right.
Okay, let's just reset the conversation.
Well, Max Kellerman, you're not a lawyer, but I don't see what standing for the national anthem has to do with anybody's political beliefs. As a matter of fact, the national anthem is relatively considered nonpartisan. Just looking at Max Kellerman's face, you can see that he's not all there mentally. He's high on that drug known as superliberalism. And that's why I tell you, brothers, behind every woke liberal black is a liberal Caucasian, particularly a liberal Caucasian Jew like a Max Kellerman, who you can see here is wide-eyed and bushy-tailed on this issue. And he'll be the first one to try to castigate black men who were to stand up and say that we have to take back over our communities. Because please keep in mind that the liberal Caucasian Jew is also the entity that teaches that the woman is above the man. At least they teach that to the Goyim.
Conversation really quick, because I felt like we went on for a while, but it was fantastic. Stephen A is essentially saying that they should stop protesting at games, and that on a Tuesday off day, galvanize the troops, all the NFL players, and march on Washington, because that's where the issue lies. And Max is suggesting to get rid of the entire ceremony altogether.
Well, no.
The ceremony is not going anywhere, but that certainly is what it sounded like Max Kellerman was saying.
Well, no. If you want a neat resolution to so-called protests.
No, sir. That's not going to bring a quote-unquote neat resolution. All that's going to bring about is more upheaval by the NFL's conservative fan base. So you're completely erroneous on that assertion. No, sir.
Right. I agree with Max in this. There was a time when I was in the NFL where we weren't out there for the national anthem. So it wasn't as important to everybody then until the bucks and the dollars started to talk. There have been many times they still sell concessions during the national anthems. When I was on the field standing for the national anthem, holding the flags along with soldiers and along with other military personnel. Wasn't an issue then. Marshawn Lynch actually sat before Colin Kaepernick began to protest.
He did.
Right? Why wasn't it an issue? Because Marshawn Lynch wasn't sitting in protest of police brutality. He wasn't sitting in protest or voicing his protest about social injustice. He was just sitting down. The problem became for everybody not about sitting, not about kneeling, it's about what they were doing it for.
No, sir. The reason why Marshawn Lynch has never been scrutinized for his quote-unquote protest is because he does not have the connections of a Colin Kaepernick. They already knew that this situation was going to be brought to a head. And I get a lot of pro-black dudes that come on my channel and they say, well, originally Colin was sitting, but the one knee protest started when Nate Boyer, the place kicker or the long snapper, whatever he is, came and spoke to Colin Kaepernick and said, well, yes, Nate Boyer is an MK handler. I did a video on Nate Boyer already. It's very obvious to me that he was a plant as well. This is a person who never played football in his life and was allowed on the University of Texas Longhorns roster as a long snapper, and amazingly got drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. And I believe it was the athletic director at the University of Texas who had a history with Nate Boyer in the military who brought him onto the University of Texas roster. His name is skipping my mind, but he was a very prominent military official. Once again, for many of you brothers, I know that many of the things that I say may sound a little far-fetched, but the rabbit hole is deep with many of these things, especially when they're trying to promote Marxism or trying to utilize certain strategies to socially engineer society. Don't ever underestimate the lengths that people will go to achieve their means. But just to get back to the point, as I stated earlier in the video, it's very obvious to me that the reason why they have not paid Marshawn Lynch as much attention as Colin Kaepernick or Michael Bennett is because Marshawn Lynch is not one of their assets.
Because I'm sure there are other causes that if people took a stand, if football players took a stand, because they're always asking them to be role models, to go back to the communities, that it'll be okay. So let's not cloud this picture and act like it's just about them sitting. It's just about them kneeling. It's about what they're kneeling, sitting, and protesting for. And you speak about legislation, walking out and protesting in front of the Capitol. They do this on their off day. If you follow Malcolm Jenkins, if you follow Kenny Stills, if you follow Eric Reed, they've met with legislators. They've met with lawmakers. They've done these things. The bigger issue about what you're saying, Stephen A, is what gives football players an opportunity to have a voice is that they're football players, right? Because anybody, right? If Molly's little cousin decided to march on Washington and protest or something, she could, right? It's a very select few people who can kneel on the sidelines of an NFL game because they put the work in and because they earn the spot that can do that. So they're using their voice in spite of what could happen to them.
But we got to stop playing games. And I'm not accusing you of that. I'm just speaking generically. We have to stop playing games with this. First of all, the National Football League was not the ones being protested against. We don't talk about that enough, number one. Number two, Colin Kaepernick goes out on August 9th and tweets support of Kenny Stills because he took a knee. Last time I checked, Malcolm Jenkins has been very supportive of Colin Kaepernick. How come you didn't tweet support for him?
Because Malcolm Jenkins was not protesting in the way that Colin Kaepernick was protesting. And that's what happens with many of these lame protests. It starts to become a he said, a he think type of issue or dynamic where people want credit. People become addicted to attention. That's why I stated that the reason why Malcolm Jenkins decided that he was going to come back into this current NFL season holding up his fist is because he's become an attention addict. And so is Colin Kaepernick. And these are a lot of the issues, a lot of the little mini dynamics that affect many of these quote unquote movements and stop them from achieving what they allegedly were meant to achieve. That's why I tell many of you brothers when you come on my channel is not a fanboy channel. I'm not here for cats who say that they're a fan of mine. You don't need to be a fan of mine. Your woman should be a fan of yours. And your children should be fans of yours. So that you can be a leader in your own household. Because all these dudes that try to make these grandiose gestures, they always end up turning on one another and trying to cannibalize one another because they become attention addicts. They become attention whores. And that's the bottom line of it. Now, Brian makes some relatively decent points when he states that some of the NFL players have tried to approach legislators and congressional members and things of that nature. But once again, I just don't believe that they have the ability to articulate exactly what their grievance is and present it in a way that would make it something that a congressional member will be swayed by. At the end of the day, the prison industrial complex is a major component of the American economic system. And I just don't think that many of our people understand that. They keep trying to win over the hearts of these Congress members. Congress members are bankers. Judicial committee members are bankers. When I say judicial committee members, people like Supreme Court judges and people of that nature, they're bankers. When you go to court and you appear before a judge, you're appearing before a banker. Okay? So every transaction is commercial in value and is commercial in every aspect. Every crime is viewed as a commercial crime. I've stated this in numerous videos. So what the so-called black man has to do is to understand the system that is configured in a way, as Denzel Washington put so well, the system is against you, so then you should not succumb to it. We have to think on a far higher level and not succumb to a lot of the base yearnings that we might have.